I am Tom McCarthy, broadcasting to you from my basement in St. Louis. It's kind of remarkable how all this technology works. And I have one complaint to make. Nancy stole my thunder about accents, and I was going to comment on how Charles said that he grew up watching American television. Well, all we watch is British television over here. So it's kind of ironic. I also grew up in the Chicagoland area and familiar with much of the Willow Creek story. And she would probably be shocked to know how many people who have been part of and on the staff at Willow Creek that I knew and still know. So it's interesting how many places of intersection there are. But before we move on to our last speaker, I hope that those of you who are attending a CB event for the first time can appreciate the breadth and the depth of all this, and understand that this is an organization with some very bright, dedicated people. Go on their website, absorb as much as you can. This organization deserves your financial support as well, and really can utilize every dollar in a responsible way. In sitting through this for the last 2 days, I've once again come to appreciate how much CBE has added to my life, intellectually, spiritually, physically. It's given us, both my wife and I, a great deal of encouragement through the years. Complementarians hold a tremendous advantage. They have the majority of the strategic power positions. They have unlimited positive reinforcement from within their own ranks. And it's easy for them just to ignore people who don't agree with them. But I think what is really important is that we are persistent and well schooled, because I've always been impressed at how shallow most complementarians that I have encountered, how shallow their knowledge of scripture is. They just believe what they're told. And it's to me, it's kind of appalling. But it is what it is. And then lastly, I want to thank Mimi for letting me play with the cool kids again, and being part of this conference. I hadn't realized how much I miss it. So that is a few of my comments, and we want to move now to our last presenter. It's Dr. Boaz Johnson, who is a professor of Hebrew, Bible, and Theological Studies at North Park College. He's been there since 2003. Now, he writes about his own personal experience, saying that he remembers walking to his Hindu grammar school in the New Delhi area where he grew up. It was a slum, and he talks about encountering two different realities. The one is the reality of poverty and injustice, and the other is the high caste Hindu learning. And wrestling with that dichotomy expanded his spiritual search. At some point, at a point, he encountered the teachings of Jesus. And he said, it captured my mind and my imagination. I realized that this is the person, or this person, in this person lie the answers to the questions that plagued my mind. Now we're talking decades later. That initial encounter with Jesus continues to fascinate Dr. Johnson and informs his life and work as an expert in the relationship of evangelical Christianity to world religions. He is a busy instructor and teacher. He received his BA in economics from Hans Raj College in the University of Delhi, an MDiv in New Testament Studies from Unita Bible Seminary in Pune, India, a THM in Hebrew Bible and Semantic Languages from Trinity, and his PhD in Hebrew Bible and Theological Studies, also from Trinity. So it is a great honor and, again, a wonderment to see how many just dedicated and qualified people are within this organization, and just how deep the resources that we've been entrusted with by God, how deep they go. So without any further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Boaz Johnson.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Tom McCarthy. I've heard great things about you, and I'm so thankful for your very, very kind introduction to me. I'm so thankful, as are you, I know, and as are all the participants in this session, the participants in the whole conference for Christians for Biblical Equality. I've learned so much from CBE, so much from our amazing leader, Mimi Haddad, and I also serve on the board of CBE, and I learn from people that are ministering as medical doctors, as social workers, as theologians, women who have taught me so much. So I'm thankful for this opportunity to speak to you today in this final session of today of the conference. I know that there is people from the UK where it is late at night, and perhaps from New Zealand and Australia and other parts of the world. I want to welcome you to this session and to this conference, and I'm sure this has been just an amazing experience. All the sessions are just so profound. They're so profound because it's dealing with the scriptures, the text of the Bible, and how does that pertain to issues that we encounter with regard to who is a woman in the Bible. I became a follower of Jesus through the writings of an amazing woman. Her name is Pandita Ramabai, and that's what I want to focus on today. I lived in two different worlds. I lived in the world of the slums. So if you've seen Slumdog Millionaire, you know what was my upbringing like. I was like one of those little kids, and I saw a lot of horrible things happen. Boys that'll disappear at age 8, at age 10, just because they were owned by high caste people. Girls that'll disappear as soon as they got their first period. And I often wondered, what's going on? What is life all about? And then somehow my parents got me admission in a high caste school in New Delhi. It was a little bit of a distance from the slum where I was, but that's where I would go. They got me and my sister a nice pair of uniform for this particular school, and I was trained in Sanskrit and in the text of Pali and other texts of these religions, Jainism, Hinduism, Buddhism, and so on. But there was this idea in my mind, this struggle in my mind. Why is it that these religious experiences that I'm having, including experiences where you have outer body experiences in high caste Hinduism, which is here called yoga, but really it is, kindergarten level stuff that is taught in the Western countries. In India, you have these outer body experiences. And I said, how is this addressing the issues that pertain to these girls who are disappearing from my slum? And so that's when I encountered the writings of this amazing woman by the name of Pandita Ramabai. Pandita Ramabai lived in the late 19th century, the early 20th century. She comes from a very, very high caste family, and I'll show you a picture of hers. This is Pandita Ramabai, quite an amazing woman. She belonged to a very, very high caste family, but later on in her life, as she experienced a lot of awful things, there was the famine, there was the bubonic plague that was going on, and then it was topped off by the pandemic that struck the world in the early 20th century. She was struggling with issues, and then she came to realize that the answer to those issues lay in this person, Jesus, who reached out to the woman at the well and who healed the lives of so many Marys of the world. These were the women who stuck with him at the cross. His disciples did not. His disciples went helter-skelter. It was all those Marys. And the name means the suffering ones. The word Mary means the ones who endure a lot of injustice and suffering. That's who Jesus reached out to, and Pandita Ramabai was so taken up with this person. Here's another picture of Pandita Ramabai in the place where she established a sanctuary. It's called Ramabai Mukti Sanctuary. It's Mukti means holistic salvation. During the bubonic plague, when girls were forced to worship goddesses like Yalama and gods like Ganesha, who rode on the rat, and of course the whole temple was full of rats, and that infected the girls. She went from village to village between 1889 and 1920s, early 1920s. She went from one village to another and rescued girls from the hands of people who had taken them in the name of religion, who had taken them in as sexual slaves. You can see that, you know, she was a short woman. She was a little woman with a huge heart. Here I went along with another group of leaders into this place where she worked hard, rescued hundreds of girls, and then she taught them the Bible. This is a picture of the 100th anniversary stamp, which was issued in 1989 by the government of India, issued in her honor because they recognized the work that she did. And here's a write-up from this, the release that the Indian government put out in the centenary commemoration. And it says this: Pandita Ramabai, 1858 to 1920. Pandita Ramabai was the youngest daughter of a high caste person, Anand Shastrian. But of course, everyone will say, whoa, she belongs to the highest caste category. At age 22, she became the first woman Sanskrit scholar of the first university in India, called Calcutta University, which conferred on her the titles Saraswati and Pandita. These are the highest titles any professor can get. And then she thumbed her nose at the high caste people who ruled her university and married an outcast person, the lowest caste person. She widowed. Within a year of her marriage, her husband died, and then she's searching for answers one after another. Among the writings that her husband had, who was quite a scholar, she discovered the New Testament. And that's when she became a follower of Jesus. Between 1889 and 1920, she rescued girls, hundreds of girls, and brought them into this place that she somehow got. And she says, I'm going to give you sanctuary, girls. You have experienced so much. These was widows, these were devadasis. The word devadasis means those girls who were slaves of the high caste priests who ruled the temple. So they were the slaves of these devas. And she established this place called Mukti Sadan, the house of salvation. And then right in the midst of that, she translated the Bible. And I'll tell you why she translated the Bible. She stood like I'm standing right now. She stood all the time and looked at the original text that she had learned, Hebrew, Greek, Aramaic. My goodness, she was so profound in languages that she learned, and she decided to translate the Bible into these languages. One of the things that I want to do in this segment is to give you an understanding as to why she wanted to do that. For one, I want us to understand the paradigms of religion and society that Pandita Ramabai was facing. It's a long history, obviously, and I'm going to not go into details here, which I normally do in a class on world religions or world societies. Between 3000 and 1500 BC, there was a very, very vibrant civilization in India. It was called the Indus Valley Civilization along the banks of these rivers called Indus and Ganges and so on. This is a very vibrant civilization, a civilization that believed in one God. And Pandita Ramabai came to realize that these are the original dwellers of India. Then between 1700 and 500 BC, there were invaders that came. In the 1700s, 1500s, invaders that came from the upper regions of the Caucasian hills, they were called Aryans, and they destroyed the Indus Valley civilization and brought in Hinduism. And that, of course, was followed by post-Vedic Aryan Hinduism. Again, I'm not going to go into details there. And classical Hinduism, and then dualistic Hinduism. These are all different variations of Aryan religion that was brought into India. And then we encounter modern Hinduism, and that is where Pandita Ramabai comes into the picture. This is a map of India here, and I hope you're able to see my mouse, the pointer moving here. This is the region where she worked. This is a place called Mumbai right here, and about 3 hours away from here, in a place called Pune, she established the House for Girls, who she rescued during the bubonic plague, the famine, and the pandemic of the early 1900s. This is, of course, a map of the world. I want to show you just very quickly here to give you the context, historical context. The Aryans moved from the Caucasian hills and took control of the northern part of Africa and this part of India and Afghanistan and Persia, from which, of course, you get the word Iran comes from Aryan. There's different aspects of Aryan religions that you find, and that's found among the Hittites and the Perizzites and the Jebusites and so on and so forth. One needs to understand a little bit of that history here. Here's what she discovered as she was reading the texts. In the Rig Veda, which is the Hindu Aryan text, she discovered that the Rig Veda talks about how this god was divided into different portions. From the head, from the mouth of this god came the highest caste called the Brahman, who then became the enslavers of low caste girls. From the arms of this god came the the militaristic caste, or the Kshatriya. From the thighs of this god came the Vaishyas, the business caste. These are the people who rule society even today and during the time of Pandita Ramabai. And then the 2 feet are the slaves. Under the slaves, these are called the Shudras. Under the slaves are the untouchables. Pandita Ramabai sought to rescue girls from the lower 2 categories because they did not belong to these caste categories. I want to show you a little bit this picture. This triangle gives you a little bit of an idea of what I'm talking about here. If you look at the whole map of people that Pandita Ramabai was dealing with, it is only about 9% of the population that are considered to be human beings. 52% are called OBCs today, or slave caste, Shudra. And then under that, you have the outcasts and the tribal people. These are the original dwellers of the descendants of the Indus Valley civilization. Here's what Pandita Ramabai wrote, and bear with me as I read this for you. In her writings during this time, she says, there are 2 things on which all those Hindu books that I read and taught at Calcutta University dwell on. Women of high and low caste as a class were bad, very, very bad, worse than demons, and that they could not get salvation or moksha as men. Why? Because they are treated as less than animals. Can you imagine what she was going through as she was being a professor of Sanskrit at Calcutta University and just mourning over all that? The only hope of their getting this much desired liberation from karma and its results, she goes on to say, that is countless millions of births and deaths and unfolding suffering, was the worship of their husbands. The husband is the woman's god. This god may be the worst sinner and a great criminal, still he is her god, and she must worship him. That is her karma. And that is what Pandita Ramabai was facing. And as I go on further, she continues to write, she can have no hope of getting admission into Svarga, heaven, and the abode of the gods, Ishvara, without his pleasure. And if she pleases him in all things, she will have the privilege of going to Svarga, which is heaven, as his slave, there to serve him and be one of his wives among the thousands of the Svarga harlots who are presented to him by the gods in exchange for his wife's merit. The same rules are applicable to the Shudras, the untouchables, the slaves, and the outcasts. The Shudras must not study the Veda and must not perform the same religious acts which only a high caste Aryan Brahman has a right to perform. The Shudra who hears the Veda repeated must be punished by having his ears filled with liquefied lead. His only hope of getting liberation is in serving the 3 high castes in their lifelong, as their lifelong slave. There are 2 things on which these books depend. So she goes on to stress this. Then when she became a follower of Jesus, she began reading the Bible. And when she read the Bible, she says, my goodness, all the words that I taught as a professor of Sanskrit, as a professor of the Aryan literature, are the words that I used in this Bible that I'm reading in Marathi. These are the words that I used by girls that are reading their Bibles in Hindi and Gujarati and Bengali and all the languages of India. why would they want to read this Bible? There is no difference between the words of God, the words of heaven, the words of hell, the words of describing the laws. It is all meant for high caste people. It's not meant for my girls. And that is why she translated the Bible. Here's what she said. There are many words in the Marathi Bible of this kind which clearly refer to the Brahmanic Aryan thought. These words should not be allowed to remain in the vernacular translations of the Bible. I went into the archives of the place where she established this house of sanctuary for girls. It's still there, and there's still hundreds of girls, and there are people serving these girls. And when I went there, I found these amazing notes that she wrote. There were notes of one verse of the Bible, and she had 2 pages of notes that she wrote in which she talked about why she should change all these words in the Bible so that my girls, she would say, so that 90% of the population of India and the girls and the women, especially that are in this 90% of the population of India, will say, yes, I want this God. Yes, I want this message of salvation. But when they read those translations, they say, why should I get this? Why should I get this God? This is no different than the gods of the Aryans who have subjugated us to various forms of servitude. And so she goes on to say, the words Ishvar or Parmeshwar are proper names of Mahadeva, one of the Hindu Aryan triad, and do not denote the supreme God of the Bible. Why are you putting these words in our Bible? She said. The words Jehovah and Yah revealed by God as his proper names are translated by the word Param Ishwar in Marathi and in other Indian languages. Why are you doing that? She cried out. Now, one of the things I found out is that she did write a lot, and she did talk about why was she translating the Bible, the whole Bible, into the language of the low caste and outcast people. And the high caste leaders of the churches, they came into her office and they denigrated her, they shouted at her. I've read letters in the archives there where they used really abusive language toward this little short woman, brilliant woman. She talks about Mahadeva and Ganesha's vehicle, the rat, and Yalama, this goddess that takes on temple prostitutes into their midst. She says, those are not the words that should be a part of the Bible. And here's again what she goes on to say. The word for heaven, look at that carefully, she says. The word svarg, heaven in Hindi and in Marathi, denotes the abode of the gods, where Indra, the king of the Hindu gods and also the Persian gods, is supposed to reign. The place is described to be full of sensual pleasure, where a man, this is a high caste man, a high caste Aryan priest, goes to enjoy the pleasures brought by upvarga, by merit. And then she goes on to say he's supposed to be fortunate and lives a life of unmixed pleasures, enjoying the company of hundreds and thousands of celestial harlots called apsaras. After all, this karma is this karma is spent. He's cast down to the earth and reincarnated in some good high caste family where he has all the chances of reattaining Swarga by his upvarga. So words matter, and Pandita Ramabai wanted to pay careful attention to those words. Genesis chapter 1 and verse 1. Hindi is one of the languages of India. Here's how it begins. In the beginning, Parmeshwar created the heavens and the earth. I read that throughout my life. And I would say, what? This is the God who enslaves my people. Ramabai translates it as, in the beginning, Deva. She just uses the word theos, God, Deva, fashioned the heavens and the earth. And then she goes on to say, the soul of God, Devacha Atma, creatively churns the primeval waters as an act of birthing. This is so profound. He says, read Genesis chapter 1 and verse 2 carefully. It's almost like God is like a mother who is churning up the birthing waters to give birth to new creation. That is so powerful in the way in which a woman by the name of Pandita Ramabai would look at the very first two words of the Bible. Genesis chapter 2 and verse 18. I just want to give you some vignettes. We're not going to go through the whole translation, obviously, but I picked up some vignettes primarily from the book of Genesis because I think that is very important. Here's Genesis chapter 2 and verse 18. Here's how she translates it. The spirit-like helper. When God created the woman, he created the woman not to be a helpmeet for him, or to be a helpmate for him, or to just come behind him. The whole picture that I have of a family in a place like India is this guy who's trotting along, and maybe 5 miles behind him is his wife, and she's got one child here, one child on the shoulder, and there's 5 others that are lunging on to her. She says, no, this is not a helpmeet for him. This is not a secondary person, but this is a spirit-like helper. Misati Tyacha, Prati Purata, Pacha Sahai Nirman Karin. This is a woman that is just like the Spirit of God who created the universe. And that is the picture that she wanted her girls to get, as against the Marathi translation that they were reading. The word that's used for woman, she is very careful about that. In Hindi, the word Istri is a low-level creation who always serves man. In Marathi, another translation, it's Nar Nari. Again, a low-level goddess who serves the god. Ramabai refuses to use those words. She talks about Purush and Purushi. This is not a person that is secondary to man. Choice of words is so important, and we need to pay attention to that in any language. And Ramabai gives us just an amazing example of how careful usage of words is very important. In chapter 3, there is the famous story, obviously, of the woman and the man and the serpent, and the whole blame in India and in Western society, let's face it, in all of these texts, is always placed on the woman. Look at her, look at what she did. Here's what Ramabai says. There is the tree of life, Jivana che jhadi. And then there's the Jnanana che jhadi, the tree of knowledge. And then she goes on to say that, haven't you read in your Aryan literature that there were women who were taken under this Jnanana che jhadi, the tree of knowledge. And this is the sacred Ashvata tree or the Nyagroda, under which these women were given a sacred drink that's called soma. And after that, these high caste Aryan priests, in the name of religion, will have sexual encounters with these women. In the process, they said they became divine. That is what is happening in Genesis chapter 3, says Pandita Ramabai. And one needs to understand the relationship between ancient religions that you find in Mesopotamian literature and Egyptian literature and Syrian literature and religions that are found in other parts of the world. Because unfortunately, throughout the world, and Ramabai was in the United States and she was in the UK, she says, no, they don't understand what is going on in Genesis chapter 3. Come and see it from the perspective of the living Indian religions. In chapter 3 and verse 12, where in the English translation is translated as the serpent deceived me, she looks at the Hebrew word there, and she's written quite a lot about it. She says the word that's used there is the word that's used for this, the religiously oriented rape of a woman. And that's what the serpent said. So profound, isn't it? So profound. Translations matter. And Pandita Ramabai has made it so creatively clear for us. Chapter 3 and verse 15 through 18. It's so beautiful for her to read in her commentary on this. She talks about that not being a prescription that a man will lord it over his wife and so on and so forth, but it's an aspect of what is going on. It's descriptive of what is going on in society today. So there are quite a number of illustrations that I have. I won't go into details here. Genesis chapter 6 is so powerful to see how she describes Noah's flood as not an act of judgment, but an act in which God is seeking to cleanse society from what the Aryan people did to the low caste and the outcast girls. And that goes on in Genesis 6 and so on and so forth. And probably I can make some of this available to you. It's so powerful to see her translation in Genesis 16 and the Abraham and Sarah and Hagar narrative. And then in chapter 18 and 19, it's so powerful when she translates the word cries. It's the cries of her girls that she has in mind. That's what God came to address. In Genesis 38, in the story of Tamar, it's really powerful there, in which she talks about Tamar as a woman who is the apex of the par excellence woman who knows what justice is all about. Rahab, she does not translate it as a prostitute, but she is a person who is a skillful woman of dexterity. Look at her skills, she says. That's what you need to pay attention to. And so we can go on and on, Bathsheba and that narrative in chapter 31 of Proverbs. It's so powerful. In the Hindi translation, it says a Pali Patni, a person who is a coy woman who can find. Marathi says that. She says, no, this person who is physically, intellectually, and morally, and in every way a strong woman. And that's the kind of woman I want you to be. So we can go on and on about this. I've got illustrations from Ruth and from other parts of the Bible as well. it's fascinating that she paid such careful attention to details. The book of Ruth is really profound as I read it in Pandita Ramabai's translation. And my hope is that we would listen to these kinds of voices. I would want to go to the translators of the New International Version and the New Revised Standard Version and all these people and say, can you listen to the voice of Pandita Ramabai? She was always looking at the text of the Bible and saying, Jesus reached out to that woman at the well. You know why? Because he wanted to transform society. That was the core of the gospel. I'll stop with this illustration. As she taught these girls in 1904 from her translation of the Bible, amazing things started happening. These girls started speaking in tongues, and there was this fire-like things like descended on them, and the girls were running helter-skelter to get some water to pour it upon those other girls. And they went into villages, the same villages where there were horrible things happened to them. They went in there and laid hands on people, and healing started happening. And I always say to scholars, you think the modern revival started at Azusa Street? No, it started with Pandita Ramabai, who faithfully taught her girls the Bible, and the Spirit of God descended upon them. And that revival spread throughout India in 1904, spread throughout India, spread into North Korea, spread into Chile and into South Africa. I think that's what happens when the Bible is translated rightly, to give our women across the world the power to live by the word of God, and they will become just like the woman of John chapter 4, where the whole village turned to Jesus. That's what happens when a Bible is translated, to see what the power of the Bible is to transform women, and through women transform society. We do have some time for questions, right? Are there questions there, Annie? Are you going to moderate this? Or Tom, one of you?
Just go right ahead. I'd say open it up.
Yeah, I can look in the chat box here.
Can you look at the chat box and then read it, and then I will respond to it?
Yes, of course. Let's see.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Maybe I'll stop sharing here.
Oh, sure. I'm seeing more comments and questions. I see
they're mostly
Oh, yes, comments. Go ahead. What are some of the comments? Do you want to read those, please?
Oh, yeah. I mean,
they think
Tom,
you're wonderful.
Tom, you can go ahead if you'd like.
I say most of them are compliments, wanting to make sure too that your PowerPoint is available to be reviewed later.
I will send it to Mimi, and I'm sure Mimi and Annie can make that available to you.
One question was, is her Bible available in English?
This is very interesting. No, it is. Well, I would want it to be available in English. I think that's a project that I would like to take on, because I think the English-speaking world needs to know about that, and that's a part of this project that I've undertaken. I do want to say this, that in 1989, I talked about the celebration of our centenary of the founding of the House for Girls. They issued a revised translation of her Bible. They changed everything. They thought that this intelligent woman who knew Sanskrit, who knew languages, did not understand language. And so when I looked at those revisers of the Bible Society of India, and I would ask them, why did you change this? They said, well, you know, she didn't understand language. That was the excuse they gave. I think the excuse really is they wanted to undo the work that she did to give power to women. That was their goal. So unfortunately, if you read the 1989 centennial Ramabai Bible, it's undone all the work that she did with reference to empowering women. And sadly, that's what our society is like, isn't it? And that's why we have CBE.
There's one question, is there any translation trends in India now that incorporate her ideas?
I want to say that even today, after so many years of the history of theological education, the heroes that are brought before theological students, and I went to theological school in India, the heroes are all high caste Aryan men. It is not outcast and low caste women. It is not Pandita Ramabai. It is people who are Aryan high caste people, and it's almost like a badge of honor. You know, people give testimonies when they come forward, and the first sentence they'll say is, hello, my name is so-and-so, and I am a high caste Aryan man, as if Jesus should be so happy that they became a follower of Jesus. And unfortunately, that is the case even in India today. We have started a PhD program in India, and the intent is to bring in outcast and low caste women who will study at the highest level. And my hope is that they will come up where they'll be the daughters of Pandita Ramabai and come up with the thoughts of Pandita Ramabai. I think that needs to be reiterated in so many different ways. And so do pray for that. Do pray for that.
Here's a question from old friends of mine, the Murrays. How did she ensure that her translation into a language that empowered according to how she and we understand the gospel also corresponded to the accurate understanding of the original text? Obviously, you know, a person is captive to time and isn't going to be there forever to make corrections, course corrections.
But Pandita Ramabai was a very, very careful linguist. You know, she was highly studied in Sanskrit and in Pali. She studied the Hebrew and the Aramaic and the Greek texts very carefully. I wish I could bring before people what I saw in her notes. So I went into this archives. It's in a very remote area. The girl the institution she established for the girls because she had to take them out of the regular villages. Otherwise, they would be recaptured by the high caste Aryans. So when I went in there, even today, it's a remote place. I went into these archives. There's a little hut there, and I saw boxes, cardboard boxes, and I opened up those boxes and I saw her notes. One verse, and then she wrote careful notes on each single letter, each single word of the Bible. So she was very careful to make sure that she was being faithful to the original text of the Bible. And I went to the director and said, what are you doing? Why are these lying in boxes like this and gathering dust and dirt and all that? And so then I got some of my students to go there and put them in acid-free boxes, and they are available for research. If some of you want to send students with me when this pandemic is over and all that, there is a need for people to do research work in her translation methods, and the notes are available for study.
One question of my own, Boaz, is church tradition teaches or mentions that they think the Apostle Thomas made it all the way to India. Now, there's obviously some parallels between what became the canon of Christian scripture and these texts in India, which seem to come together without any direct influence from those early church texts. There's parallels. It's not identical, but there's many parallels, which she obviously identified. In the timeline that you showed in the beginning of your presentation, how do these dates fit together? You're talking about a few hundred years beyond, in the beginning of the Christian era. Is that something that was rediscovered, or did it independently develop these parallel ideas?
Well, Pandita Ramabai is also a child of her time. There was a reason why she married a low caste man, because she was influenced by other thinkers. So there was a resurgence that was happening in the late 19th century that she was influenced by the mid to late 19th century that she was influenced by. Going to your original question about St. Thomas, there is a very, very important, there's tradition and there is documentary evidence that Jewish people came into India way back before Jesus's time, and they lived in a place called Kerala, and that is the trail that Thomas followed through the Silk Route, through Afghanistan, Pakistan, and on into India. And there is evidence of rabbinic texts. Another place for Bible translation, my goodness, I wish we would do some of that, because there is in Cambridge University a translation of the whole New Testament that is written in pre-medieval rabbinic Hebrew. It's so profound for us to understand, how did they understand the New Testament? These are rabbis that lived in India. That's the route that St. Thomas followed in the 1st century, and there is a lot of documentary evidence for that in the history of the church as well.
Okay. Well, we're at the top of our hour, and we certainly want to give Mimi a chance to respond and react to the conference as a whole. But let me thank you, Boaz, for bringing something entirely unique, at least to my experience, as far as this conversation goes, and quite remarkable. So thank you again. Virtual applause from all corners of the globe, and thanks. So now we come to the close. This is not nearly as difficult for me to do virtually as it is when I am physically with you, because a victim, one of the major victims of our virtual agenda is our chance to worship and share communion together, which has always been a tradition at CBE conferences. It is, as one of our founders used to refer, kind of an echo of Eden, an opportunity, a little moment in time where we are what we were made to be. We don't get that now specifically, but I think you get the sense that it's out there and it's within us. So this has been a great opportunity, in spite of the obstacles of the world, to come together again and consider God's work amongst his people, and how we as the body of Christ are charged with taking that message forward. So thank you to all the participants. Thank you especially to Annie, who has been the driving force for literally months on this whole thing. And she's furiously working her keyboard up in the Chicagoland area as well. And it all seems to work. So, and there's other members, staff members at CBE who are faithfully there every day responding to the inquiries and the requests and the things. And it's a wonderful organization to be affiliated with.